There have been more canceled or paused Star Wars projects than released ones at this point, but with Skeleton Crew coming in less than a month, things might be looking up for Disney, unless this report on the future of the Skywalker saga is a misstep. Welcome to Star Wars Uplink, your place for everything Star Wars gaming, the TV shows, and the movies. Let's jump in.
Just you reconsider playing that message for him.
Skeleton Crew is kind of what I'm looking for when I say Star Wars needs to be about more of the experimental. I love stuff like Andor, where it has this more contained view of the Star Wars galaxy. Obviously, Andor has huge ramifications that ultimately lead to the destruction of the Death Star, but when you look at it from a surface level, you get to see more of what the galaxy looks like to the average person. And with Skeleton Crew, with the new trailer that just dropped, I think we might be getting something similar to that experience, something that takes Star Wars a little bit differently. The whole premise of this, as has been reported since its inception, was this idea of a very Amblin-esque, Goonies-like Star Wars experience, embodying the feel of retro 80s movies and bringing that to the modern age. This is something very interesting. It's a TV show made for adults, but starring children, and I think that really, it calls back to the original of Star Wars, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you say it's just a little bit different. I'd say it's quite a bit different.
Yeah,
than
I mean,
we've got
Star Wars suburbia.
Yeah,
a whole planet.
Yeah, quite different from Andor, quite different from original Star Wars, quite different from what they've been doing with Ahsoka and all this. Like these very large and heroic moments and things of these characters. Obviously, we're going to probably be seeing heroic children, but... Yes.
And also we've got Jude Law as well in the role of this hidden Jedi, that I always loved that experience. One of my favorite book series as a kid growing up. One of the reasons that I really got into reading were the Galaxy of Fear books, where you have Uncle Hool, who's this shape-shifting, force-sensitive character with two of his niece and his nephew that are force sensitive as well. They're going across the galaxy, trying to stay undercover, but become part of things in the galaxy that ultimately have larger ramifications, or people or characters or locations that are in the broader world of Star Wars. So this looks very similar to that experience. I'm really excited to see what that ultimately looks like.
It's a surprisingly not done thing in Star Wars. I think we've seen aspects of this hidden Jedi gone kind of rogue thing, but not like this. Like this actually feels different, feels very fresh, even just from what we've seen in the commercial or preview. It
feels so unique with Star Wars, and that's something that I'm really excited about, because it's been very hit or miss for me in terms of what I look for in Star Wars, and what I've enjoyed throughout its history is telling a unique story. And for the past few Star Wars shows, I mean Andor excluded, it seems like we've been getting closer and closer to something that we've seen in entertainment before, which is this idea of a Marvel Cinematic Universe, but with Star Wars. And it's a big feat that they're trying to accomplish with this connected universe across the books, the TV shows, the movies, the video games, the comics. All this stuff coming together to form a cohesive universe is something that's very unique, and not many entertainment properties have been able to accomplish that very well. So it's unique from that perspective, but it seems like we've been getting more and more of this commercialization of Star Wars that I'm not the biggest fan of. I like it when Star Wars is this fun adventure with that's the wrapping of Star Wars. But underneath, when you actually get into the nitty-gritty of it, it's actually saying something that's quite fascinating. When you look at the original trilogy, you see this underpinning of colonialism, as well as a statement against the Vietnam Wars, and you have this idea of George Lucas saying something through his art and medium that's in this wrapper of a family-friendly romp and adventure. And if you look at the prequel trilogy of movies, you have this description of a character that is slowly being corrupted by the politics that are surrounding this idea of the corruption of the Jedi that is much bigger than what they were originally intended to be, as instead of warriors being these individuals of peace and prosperity. So you have this corruption of the Jedi. When you look at like the Acolyte, I think is the biggest example of art versus commercialism. Like you have the art of Leslie Headland and this idea that she's trying to get across, which is showcasing that corruption. But you have the commercialization where it's like, it seems like the original idea and intention had been watered down so much through that process of creation that we ended up getting something that was quite messy and predictable and in ways that didn't necessarily work when you get down to the story. That's not saying it's terrible. I think there are great things about the Acolyte, but the Acolyte succeeds most when it gets out of its own way. When it actually is the thing it was intended to be, which is showcasing this like dark side story. And it doesn't necessarily work when they start broadening that world. Look at the Book of Boba Fett too, where you have this Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka, where both of these characters were brought into the show by the Mandalorian and then expanded kind of past their reach. Like I think the Book of Boba Fett would have been a much better story if it only focused on the idea that really shines through, like the big thing, which is, what does it look like for someone that is trained in combat and death and destruction to want to be better than that?
Yeah.
And then Ahsoka has this like, it tries to do so many things, but in doing so, it says nothing. Like it is so set on being a stepping stone that it doesn't have anything it's trying to say within its own self. Like it's not a contained story. And then Mandalorian, I think, works best when it's not trying to be Mandalorian season 3, which is like trying to build all of these moving pieces for the Mandalorians to do this, for these characters to do this, for the New Republic to do this. It works best when it's an anthology told in the style of like a Western instead of like a Marvel Cinematic Universe story. Yeah.
They've definitely stepped away from what it originally was to make it a much bigger thing. So it's going to be really interesting to see where Skeleton Crew fits in with all this.
Because it is set around the same time.
Apparently.
According to reports, it's set around the time frame of The Mandalorian and Ahsoka.
That honestly kind of concerns me. Because,
oh, really?
Well, it really feels like it's its own thing. It really feels like they're not going to be stepping on anyone's toes in the Mandalorian universe or whatever.
Yeah.
But it could. That's my only maybe just don't. Like maybe make this in a completely different time frame so that I can just enjoy it and not think about where's Mandalorian right now.
Yeah. But I mean, you could also say that with the fact that so many Clone Wars characters show up in the Mandoverse. Like, why is Ahsoka in the Mandoverse time period? Because Dave Filoni wants her there. So no matter what, if they want to put a character that shouldn't be there, they will do so.
It's true.
I mean, the Mandoverse is kind of like Clone Wars
2.0.
Yeah, 2.0.
Yeah. Not necessarily in the good way either.
Yeah.
Clone Wars. Dear to my heart.
Yes. But like, I feel like Skeleton Crew has this opportunity to broaden Star Wars in a way that I think is very exciting. There have also been reports that internally it wasn't, there were people internally, I should say, that weren't as hot on the idea of the Skeleton Crew. Now, there have been also other reports that other people inside of Lucasfilm were excited about the Skeleton Crew. So it just depends on which circle you're in within Lucasfilm and who you talk to about that. But,
well, clearly it was good enough to get all the way through. Which
yeah,
is a statement
either that
or
contracts were so solid when they built them that they were legally required to release the show.
Right.
Which I feel like if you are a director looking at Lucasfilm's like, hey, we want you to direct something, you should put in your contract that they will release it because, as we'll talk about later, that's not always the case that you will make it through the entire project. But this project I think is really exciting. on that piece because you have some incredible directors attached to this. You have the showrunners themselves, which are people that were part of Spider-Man No Way Home, as well as directors of Everything Everywhere All at Once, The Green Knight, Bryce Dallas Howard, and a couple others that I can't quite remember the names of, that are involved with this project, that have done incredible things to great success, mostly in the independent side of things. When you look at like the Daniels and the director of The Green Knight, you have some movies that are really unique and also did well.
That's really encouraging to see, just because in the Dave Filoni universe that we're in right now, I think we really need a fresh take. We really need some more voices in Star Wars, just bringing something new to the table. New characters, new spaces, new ways of, I don't know, making a conflict and coming up with new solutions. It needs a little bit of a little spritz, shall I say.
Yeah, you need, I feel like Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni are almost in the space that George Lucas was in the prequel trilogy, where you have people who have done great successes, like The Mandalorian was a cultural movement. Incredible success. It made people who were not fans of Star Wars fans of The Mandalorian. Like, it did a great job with that. It's become so many people's favorite version of Star Wars. And I almost feel, especially with Dave Filoni now in this creative officer role, that now he's almost to this place that George Lucas was, where people don't necessarily want to tell him no or refine his story further. Because I feel like if he had a really strong group of constructive critics involved with Ahsoka, that show would be even better. And you can see that when other people direct episodes of Ahsoka. Some of the best episodes are ones not directed by Dave Filoni, because Dave Filoni is still very new to the whole live action directing game, which is very different. He's incredibly skilled when we look at like the animation space, but directing characters, his shows or his episodes tend to be less well paced.
Yeah.
And he needs a little bit more of that refinement. Now, releasing a Star Wars project in general is a huge task. There are lots of expectations on this. This is not necessarily a criticism of the individuals themselves. It's more so their abilities to create things, in my personal opinion. That's an opinion of someone who has directed things and has written things. So it's not like I'm just a couch critic. I feel like there is an opportunity for people to be better. And the only way for Dave Filoni to get better is to be releasing things, creating things, and being involved in that project from beginning to end. So hopefully Ahsoka Season 2 is going to be that growth perspective, because I feel like there's so much that can be said if they get out of their way instead of trying to make stepping stones. Consider each season its own wrapper that ends up connecting to other things.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the beginning of Ahsoka Season 1 and the end of Ahsoka Season 1, not much happens. There's not much character growth. There's not much. It's a lot of like, oh, and they do this thing, and then therefore this thing happens. Like, it's a lot of stepping stones in that direction that end up in a lacking story overall. When you look at the actual, boil it down, what's the concentrate of that story? I think it's a little bit lacking. That's not saying there aren't incredible moments. I just feel like what was intended to be there, they should have pretended like all of the events of season 1 had happened and expanded that into a second season, which hopefully they do so. My fear is, now that we've gotten to this point, we will have another season where now it's like, oh, how are Ahsoka and Sabine going to get back to the regular universe? It's going to be another stepping stone to get a little bit further into the story, rather than actually setting up characters, having character growth, having conflict with these characters.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the shows need to be longer.
It's true. They do. I mean, okay, Ahsoka had some pretty poor pacing. That's for sure. They could have used their time a lot better, but even still, we could have used more time to get more of that momentum going or something. Yes. So, again, it does make me very encouraged that Skeleton Crew is not necessarily directed by
Yes.
Everyone who has been doing all the things of late.
Yes. And I feel like, and maybe I'll get flack with this because people have obviously been complaining about Kathleen Kennedy for almost a decade now. It's not Kathleen Kennedy's fault. It is now the fault. If you don't like something in Star Wars, it's now the fault of Dave Filoni. He is now in the position where he is involved in those creative conversations in terms of the direction that these shows are going to be going in. If you're going to criticize anyone, that is the person to be criticizing. And that's not necessarily saying that they need to be criticized, that there is this ability for you to say something that they don't already know or anything like that. But Dave Filoni is now the person that is in control of Star Wars in terms of what gets produced. And then Kathleen Kennedy is the big picture person. Like, she is the person. And I think she's done an incredible job in the role that she has been given. She's a woman in film, which is incredibly hard to be, especially now. But she's been a woman in film since the 70s. So she knows what the heck she's doing. And if you think otherwise, really change your mind, because she has done incredible things. She was a part of so many incredible projects. If you love the original Indiana Jones, she was an executive producer on those. Like, she has been a part of so much of modern movie culture. But I think you can still criticize Lucasfilm in terms of what they've been delivering is not as good as it could be. That's not saying that there aren't gems, there aren't moments, there aren't incredible pieces of that. Hopefully, Skeleton Crew is another piece of something that is much better.
Yeah. Here's hoping. It looks really good.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's got the grit. It's got some sass. I'm excited to see what goes on with that. On the complete opposite side of things, now we got to go into negativity land a little bit, which is Stephen Knight, the creator of Peaky Blinders and the supposed screenwriter of the upcoming Rey unreleased project, has left.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Oh, no.
Yes. Apparently there had been a lot of back and forth with the script. There was never an official script or anything like that. And he's now left the project. And I feel like this whole thing is cursed.
Yeah.
Mandalorian and Grogu also got slightly delayed.
Oh, wow.
It is now soon to be wrapped in 2025 rather than being wrapped in this year like it was originally intended to. There's going to be reissues. There's going to be stuff that goes on with that. But it seems like this effort to create something within the Rey timeline has been pushed out a little bit. Apparently, James Mangold stuff is continuing to be pushed forward. I wouldn't hold my breath on that, but apparently there have been made great strides on that side of things. But the whole Rey project has been cursed. There have been multiple writers that have been hired on and then left. Rey's actor Daisy Ridley has said that there are soon to be updates on that. We'll see what ends up happening, because like Daisy Ridley said this in an interview, and then like a few days later, Stephen Knight was like, "Peace out, guys. I'm leaving." So I wonder what's going on there.
Yeah. The mysteries of what's going on behind the scenes with these movies and things. Yeah. Oof. That's a blow.
It makes me wonder, like, is it a good decision to continue that thread?
Right.
Is it better to leave the questions that we have for the Rey timeline just a few more years and focus on the Mandoverse? Clearly the thing that has worked with Star Wars so far, if we look at the numbers, if we look at the impact globally, especially from like a pop culture perspective, Mandalorian is the thing. Like that's what's successful. Now the spin-offs of The Mandalorian, not so much. If you look at like Ahsoka did decent. Book of Boba Fett, not so much. There's a lot of people that were such diehard fans of Mandalorian that I've talked to that didn't even realize there was a Book of Boba Fett show, or if they did watch it, weren't necessarily fans of it from a casual perspective. We'll see ultimately what happens there. But there's a lot of these pieces when you look at it. That Mandalorian is kind of, if you look at Disney Star Wars, that's Disney Star Wars. Like that's the success.
Mandalorian definitely seems like the way to go, especially with them wanting to move more into the movies side of things. Why not focus there?
Because if you move forward in the Mandalorian with the movies. You can then have Ahsoka fill in the backdrop.
Right, as the TV show.
Yeah.
And Rey, I don't know. I'm not too invested with her.
I felt like the sequel trilogy didn't do Rey the biggest service in terms of building her character up.
Which maybe that's why we need a movie. But at the same time, why? Because the last three didn't go really anywhere for her anyway.
Well, you also have to create a conflict because as far as we know, there have been successes across the galaxy. They're now in the moment of rebuilding after the fall of the First Order. You have the New Republic that have come up. You have all of these things that are happening, but they're all good. And story comes from conflict.
Right.
And there isn't any loose ends or anything like that within the sequel trilogy that makes sense. We are starting from a place of, I would like to see Rey more, instead of a place of like, what would be that conflict that would be interesting to draw people in?
True.
And there is conflict in the Mandoverse time period. You have the remnants of the Empire. You have the rebuilding of the Republic. You have all of these moving pieces. You ultimately will have the creation of the First Order, the moving parts of the rise of Kylo Ren, as well as the fall of these heroes like Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Leia. You have all these people that are within that time period that are building things. There is conflict. There is this story there that's so easily put because it's this middle gap between these big moments.
Yeah. I mean, unless you're going to make a whole new enemy, what else is there? People don't really want to watch the conflicts of peace. I mean, like, ooh, man. Is it just the conflict of creating more Jedi, or like just the conflicts of, oh, what does it mean, or what's the new Jedi gonna look like now? Like, you're gonna have to make another big bad, and I don't know if we're ready for that. I think we're still in the throes of trying to figure out who Thrawn is. You know, I'm not convinced that we're able to make a good bad guy right now. Yeah. So maybe don't. Maybe don't. Do they have, like, what other movies do they have in upcoming?
They have the James Mangold Beginning of the Jedi movie, which I think there is conflict there.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason I'm saying conflict is there's this idea where conflict is, that's where story happens. You don't necessarily have a story about going to get groceries unless, oh man, on the way to get groceries, I ran into Jeff who, oh my gosh, you know Jeff, he did all of these things and I can't believe he's being nice to me now. Like, there's story in that, but there is not story when, oh yeah, I went to go get groceries and I got all the groceries and that's fine.
Right.
When you have conflict, there is story. So that's why I'm saying, like, you kind of need that. And there's this idea with the creation of the Jedi of this pure, unadulterated idea of someone utilizing the Force. That is interesting. What happens when someone who utilizes the Force decides to go one direction and someone else decides to go the other direction? There's conflict there. When you look at The Mandalorian, there's conflict with the Mandalorian wants to continue his life as a bounty hunter, but he is now asked to question his beliefs in this cult that he was raised in around this idea of this kid, this person that he has now become emotionally attached to, has been able to protect, and must now say goodbye. There's conflict there. There's a conflict internal, there's conflict external, there's so many pieces there. When you look at Andor, there's this idea of conflict of Andor not wanting to get involved, but is now put in a position where he has to get involved. There's conflict there. When you look at the Book of Boba Fett, there's conflict of his past and now his future that he wants to build. When you look at Ahsoka, there is less conflict because not much happens.
Internal conflict, but we're not even really seeing that.
We don't see that. But when you look at like the Acolyte, there's conflict there. There's external conflict and then there's internal conflict. That's what makes a compelling story or an idea that builds a compelling story. That is what we need. And I just wonder if it's better to build out what the Star Wars of the next decade is and the Mandoverse time period, and then before, rather than building this idea. Like, you can now, with the Mandoverse, lay the groundworks for what happens ultimately. What if underneath the First Order there is this deeper hidden agenda where, like, if we look at like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you had Thanos underneath the background of happenings for a decade before we ultimately saw the culmination of that with Infinity War and Endgame. What if you build this idea of the creation of the Jedi, this force way back here? You now have the Mandoverse time period with the conflict of the Empire and the remnants of the Empire, and then the building of the First Order. What if you build that, and underneath all of this, there's now something else that ultimately comes to what Rey's movie could be? Mm-hmm. That's where we could get some excitement.
Yeah. So it feels like we're going to need some more like backstory to put Rey in a better position.
Yeah. I feel like there was opportunity for Rey to have so much more character growth if you look at what was intended with The Last Jedi. And like, there's a whole argument there of like, I think That Last Jedi is the only movie in Star Wars that had no conflict in the creation of it. Everything went smoothly, but there was this conflict in terms of, is this really what the next story should have been? You now have like this stepping stone that completely turns left and goes a different direction than what was originally led forward. That's because of multiple reasons, one of which they didn't necessarily have a plan for the whole trilogy. Then the third one was kind of playing catch up in terms of like, oh no, we actually meant this instead of that, and this instead of this, and that instead of this. And I don't think you can have Rey as a compelling character within all of that when there's so much other things that are happening.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, because I think Rey could have been such a fascinating character, and she's still fun to watch, but she needs to be built out in a way that makes sense for a continuation of that story.
Mm-hmm. At this point, I just don't really see how it can work, because Rey's interesting, but really not that interesting. Like, the idea of her is really interesting. Her in practice.
Mm-hmm.
What else is there? You know, like what is there that we need to see from her?
Is she just trying to be, are they trying to make her a modern Luke?
Right.
In terms of that path of creating a new Jedi Order. But why would you do that with this character when you could have done that with Luke?
Yeah.
But now you can't do that with Luke because of these things that have now happened.
Mm-hmm. There's also this strange occurrence of late, it seems. I wouldn't just peg this on Star Wars, but I'm going to say Star Wars. It just seems like all of these like figureheads, the wizened wizard, the one that like in the stories where like your main character goes to get to learn from and stuff. It seems like the more we see these characters, the longer they live, the more they become the villains. Like the more they become these degraded, just like
Yeah.
And they're not heroic anymore, which, I mean, is that realistic?
Yeah.
Sure. Is that what we want to see? Not really.
Mm-hmm. There's a cynicism with the heroes that have been in the media recently. I'd say probably the last maybe 10 to 15 years, there's been this idea of like, what if the heroes, it was kind of like trying to be edgy? What if this character that has been historically this way now ends up going this way? They're trying to falsely create conflict. It's why Superman movies haven't really worked very well, is because they try to make Superman into something that he's not. Superman's supposed to be a beacon of hope and prosperity and strength, and the surrounding world is supposed to be the corrupt one. You're not supposed to corrupt Superman. And I feel like there's this edginess that has been put into some stories and in terms of like corrupting these heroes. If you look at Luke, there can be an argument put there of how he got to this direction. I think it's understandable to go like, oh, Luke separated himself from entire society, and therefore the reason he did that is because of the cynicism. But there's also an alternate universe where he did that to stop events from happening, but therefore, because he was separated, didn't see other events from happening. That is an alternate universe story that could have happened, that could have protected this idea of what we have as Luke.
Yeah.
But we'll see what ends up happening. I just hope that as we go forward, there is this idea where you can have strong heroes and you can have strong villains and also have interesting conflict that is multifaceted, more so than the fact of, oh, this person got degraded by society or whatever and had to leave kind of thing. Like, I would hate to see Rey corrupted in that way where, oh, she also follows the route of, I'm a hero, I get corrupted, I have to leave because I got corrupted, and then I come back.
Yeah.
That would suck.
And that would suck because we haven't even seen her be like really a real good force for something.
Yeah.
I mean, all throughout yes, she has been really good, but it's not quite in that like way that you want to just sink your teeth into. You know, you're just like, okay, cool, Rey, you go, girl. Mm-hmm. You know, and then to see her just be like, I'm horrible, and then be like, no, not now. We needed to see more of you being cool. You know, I don't know.
Cool, and also growing through
growth
impacts and things that have happened. But let us know your thoughts in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube, or contact at uplinkpodcast.com if you're listening to this wherever you find podcasts. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.